Welcome to Quilting's first reality show. Yes. Unscripted and live with Susan Smith. Yes.
Good morning. I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. And creds to my son, Will, who does the little Yoda intro for me. He does so many different voices, and we finally pinned him down to do some fun intros for me. So today we are in my studio. I'm quilting on Lucy, the long arm. Lucy is a Gamel 26-inch throat Elevate machine. Will not be using any computer today. And we're going to be quilting an all-over edge-to-edge pattern on a super colorful and cheerful small quilt. Not really a baby quilt, but a small lap quilt today. So, as we generally do in these episodes, I'm going to go right from loading all the way through the quilting process to the end. It's not a class per se. I'll just be talking about the things I'm doing as I do them, and kind of the decisions that I'm making, so you sort of see the why of things. So before we start loading, just a couple other things. Please, if you would like and share this episode, if you're enjoying it, or the YouTube channel, then you'll get notifications when I'm live in the future. And it really helps us to get visible and be able to share this quilting journey with many other quilters. So if you subscribe, you'll receive the notifications. And also if you hit the bell, you'll know when I'm actually live. You'll get a notification, which can be very helpful. Also, this channel truly is made possible by those of you who have contributed to our Buy Me a Coffee fund. We are constantly trying to upgrade our cameras and our equipment to be smoother and better sound. And this morning we've had our share of troubles, but these get less and less as we get better equipment. So we do appreciate so much those of you who choose to support. To do that, you can just go to buymeacoffee.com/Stitched by Susan, where for the price of one delicious coffee, you can make a one-time contribution or purchase a subscription, your choice. I do have a podcast that you may like to listen to while you're in your quilting studio. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once, and Other Life Lessons Learned from Quilters. And a new episode airs every Wednesday morning. That can be found at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. Super easy. So I think that about covers it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this quilt today. So I'm just going to move Lucy out of the way and we'll get started loading the backing. Okay, Lucy's gone. I'm back, going for the backing. And here's the first interesting bit to tell you. The backing is not very much wider than my quilt, only about 3 inches. And so I have attached a leader, just a scrap of fabric, ugly fabric as you see, to the side of the quilt. And you'll see as I go on how I use that, just to give me a little more fabric for gripping, because I really need that on the sides. So I'm going to use the red snapper system for loading, as I always do. And I love it. It's super fast, and it eliminates the need for centering the elements of my quilt. So as you'll see, I'm not centering this back. I'm just placing it where I think I'd like to be on my long arm today, and that's really all I need to know. Is this a good location, hon?
No, because my other camera's not working.
So should I go closer to the right-hand side?
Oh, no, that's in the way.
Right, but I can move Lucy.
Yeah, maybe we lose it to the other end.
Okay, just gonna shift here a little bit. It's kind of been a day with gremlins. We struggled for quite a while before we went live with cameras that weren't showing up. And we got everything going smoothly, but now the one, once again, is not showing. So we may have to do with one less view today. So I'm just going to move down here a little closer to this end. So the red snapper system is super easy. There's a little plastic rod out of this red material inside my leader, and then I just snap this little clamp over the top. When I can, I like to have a selvage on the edge facing me, just because it's stable and doesn't stretch. But in this case, my selvages are running top to bottom. So I've got a cut edge here. It is nice and straight, but I'm particularly watching that I neither stretch it nor pull it in. I want it to be as smooth as possible. And I can tell that it is by looking at the fabric here. I would see if this was pulled too taut and stretched. So I'm just paying attention to that as I'm loading it. And you'll see as we start quilting why I'm not doing the selvage first. My quilting design is directional, and I want to start at the top of the quilt and work my way to the bottom, rather than quilting as I sometimes do with my quilt kind of side to side, and I quilt literally from top to bottom, if that makes sense, with the motion of my hands. Very descriptive. Important is that that is straight. Now I've got this funny tail here, which I didn't choose to cut off because I use this strip over and over again when I'm working on quilts that need a leader attached. So I'm just going to put a few pins in it to kind of keep it from flapping around and getting tangled up in stuff as I roll the quilt. Just like that. And now we'll proceed as though it were all one piece. And a little side note, in attaching this, I just put it on with a super long stitch basting, the longest that my sewing machine would do, and I didn't even press the seam. Like, it is just a temporary extra bit of fabric for gripping. And when the quilt is done, I'll just rip that basting stitch out, hang on to this strip for the next time I need to use it. So I've tossed the rest of my backing over the other side of Lucy, and I will grab my snappers and walk around and attach the other side. And you'll see how slick this really is. So the important thing here is to get all this backing over onto the other side as smoothly as possible. So I want to be absolutely sure that it's not canting to one side or the other. Do you see when I pull it a bit, you immediately start seeing kind of grooves in the fabric? That's showing that it's pulled to one side. So I really want to avoid that. So you take a moment to smooth it out, but this is what eliminates the need for centering. Rather, we're going to use the motion of rolling it on to make it straight. And then one last trick. Am I anywhere on camera? Can this be seen? I've got just a water bottle in my hand, and there is a folding crease down the center of this fabric because it's one length of fabric, right? So it's the original crease from on the bolt. And that's a fairly significant crease. And of course, I don't want a crease in my quilt back, but I don't actually need to iron it. I'm just lightly spritzing it with water and any other significant creases that I see, and that will relax. In the amount of time it takes to get it finished rolling on, that crease will relax right out. It is years since I have pressed a quilt backing, seriously. That little bit of water just does it. Okay, and now I come back and I just start rolling, and because I've got it laying straight, it's just rolling straight on. And I can see, I don't know that you guys can, but right in this edge, I can watch as I'm rolling it up, and because my selvage is here, this edge is straight, and I can literally see that it is rolling on perfectly straight. But if it wasn't, I'd come up here and I would be shifting my fabric and straightening it out. But it is rolling on beautifully. So I roll it until it's close to the leader. Oh, sorry. We've got a cable on that side. I'm going to walk around the other end. Here we go. Okay. What was I starting to say? I've lost my train of thought. But here are my snappers. We'll get them on. And where that basted seam is, just pulling that flat. It's not ironed, remember, so it wasn't perfectly flat laying there. And here too, if this end of my backing was not perfectly straight, I would not worry about it. I don't square up backings either. I just need that one straight edge to start with. And if there was any excess here or unevenness, I would just let it hang off the edge of the leader and not worry about it. There we go. Very short period of time. We have a backing loaded, and this crease has already relaxed. It has softened right out. Good to go. Okay. Let us talk about some questions. So this will take a little bit of relaying today because Dave will have to tell them to me and then I'll answer them, okay? So go.
Jeannie McNeil. She's asking, is this for a customer and if you give them any guidelines for the backing size?
Jeannie is asking if this quilt is for a customer and if I give them guidelines for the backing size. That's a funny question, Jeannie. It is for a customer and it's also for my good friend. And bless her heart, I know by now she isn't going to change. So I just make the best of it. Today's batting, by the way, is not my usual Hobbs 80-20. It's actually warm and natural because the quilt maker provided it for me. And I am doing, there's so much controversy over which side goes up and which goes down. So I can't tell you this is positively right, but what I hear most is dimples down. So that's what I've done. So there it is. Any other questions we want to do, Dave?
No, that's all.
Okay, now comes the pretty quilt. You guys are going to love this. Super cute. Look at this pretty little quilt. So now you can see where my backing fabric ends right here. I'm going to have my quilt quite close over to that seam allowance because I've got lots of gripping room here. And that gives me a couple of inches then on the other side that I can grip with my side clamps. So that was my purpose in putting this leader on, and that's why I didn't put it on both sides, because I knew that I would have enough. If I put my quilt quite close to the backing edge here, that gives me just enough room here. And again, if it was a bigger quilt, that would be harder and more difficult, and there would be more unknowns, you know, on the rollers that I couldn't see. But because it is such a small quilt, I'm pretty comfortable even with this small little bit at the side to clamp onto. I am going to move it down a little bit. I don't want to stitch quite that close to the top rail. There we go. Okay, now let's talk thread. As you can imagine, there's many things I could choose on this quilt top. It's so colorful and so bright. But what I finally narrowed it down to is this fun celery green. I love this color and there's quite a lot of it in the quilt. And I'm doing kind of a playful quilting design. So that's what's going to be on the top. The backing, as you saw, is a teal, very dark aqua or teal. It's this color actually. And I thought the green is a bit high contrast on that. Not necessarily ideal, so I decided to put aqua on the bottom. It's a little bit lighter than the fabric, but still will blend better than the green. But kind of the reason I went with that is because my top and bottom colors are similar than in darkness and in hue. And that way I don't worry about one or the other showing through too much because they're quite similar really. So I've got aqua in the bobbin, celery green on the top, and both of them are Isacord 100% poly 40 weight thread. Okay, so we are set. Let's start basting. So this process I do for every single quilt without fail. I baste the outer perimeter to stabilize the quilting area. And I'm fortunate enough to have channel locks on my machine. So right now I've got the vertical channel lock on. It's just a magnetic hold on the rails. So my machine now does not move from side to side. So I'll get a beautiful straight line up the side. So I don't even usually pin my quilt top. I literally adjust it as I'm stitching, using that channel lock as my guide. And sometimes I have to tweak it a little bit. And I know already this quilt is not perfectly square, so I'm going to work with it a little bit, massage it a little bit, do the best that I can with it. We're just going to unroll a little bit of the quilt and move it toward me so that you guys can see it better. I forget that when I'm on camera, I can't use every single working inch, and I should know better. In fact, I'm going to do a little more. You'll see when I get to doing the quilting design, I want to be able to see it when I'm establishing that first row. It's an important one. Okay, so again, I'm eyeballing the placement of this quilt at the top, and then I'm going to use my channel lock to make sure that I have a straight horizontal line. If you don't have a channel lock, then I would recommend pinning this a little bit, looking at it from the side, you know, making sure that it's straight. So I'm using my red snappers as kind of a guide because they're a straight line, and then I'm going to use my stitching line and kind of tweak it as I stitch. Horizontal lock is on. Pull a little more excess up. All the way across, it looks like. And I try to keep this basting line well within a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that it does not have to be undone when the quilt is finished. It just falls right within the binding. I'm also using my roller on the front as a visual guide for seam lines that are in here. So that's how I know how much of this side edge I need to pull up, or in some cases you have to kind of tug on it, because I want this seam line to remain straight. Hopefully you can see where my hands were gesturing there. And there we are. So now 3 sides of my quilting area are stabilized with that basting. I'm just seeing the odd thread here that I'm trimming off as I go across. Okay, and for stabilizing the 4th side, my trusty bar magnets. Hardware store variety, they're about 1 inch wide, and they're the type that you would use in a tool shop to hang tools or maybe in your kitchen to hang knives. But because my rails are iron, they work beautifully for holding this front edge of the quilt. Nice and stable. Short one here somewhere. There we go. So now all 4 sides of my quilting area are stable. It can't shift at all while I'm quilting my pretty design in it. The design we're going to do today is called Waves and Bubbles. Are there any more questions before I dive in, Dave?
No, I think we're good. They're talking about the dimples up and down. They were talking about that. And they think I'm a keeper, by the way, even though I said you're going to fire me after.
I am going to go ahead and put my clamps on the left and right side. These are the Red Snapper brand as well. I'm not necessarily brand loyal, but I am. What's important to me is that it's long like this, as opposed to, let me just show you. This is what came with my machine, a single clamp like this. And you can imagine when I clamp on with that, you get tension right here, but here only. And if you put a couple of those on, you're apt to get, you know, a bit of scalloping on the side of your quilt. So my preference is definitely a longer type of clamp. It can be a wooden one, it can be whatever, but nice and long and with some good grips that hang onto your fabric. This has got kind of a rubberized little grip in there. So let's get this in place. Different machines have different side clamps. The ones that come with mine, I think really were intended for using in conjunction with a system like this. I don't think they were intended to grab the fabric, because I still use them, of course, to grab the grabber, if that makes sense. So right here is now where I'll attach my clamp. And in terms of tension, I only pull until it's taut enough that this doesn't sag. There's not drum tension on this. It's still loose enough I can grasp my fingers. I've only put enough tension on so that it doesn't sag. And then one last thing is my trusty yardsticks. Can you see this? Yardstick curtain rods are another great one. The type of curtain rods that you pull and extend and they have a hook over the ends, they work beautifully to set across these rails. But I happen to have a couple vintage yardsticks that were my granddad's, so that's what I use. Just across the rails and holding my strap up. particularly this side. I'm going to be stitching fairly close to this edging piece, right? And I don't want Lucy, as she comes across, to bump it, and I'll get square sides on my circles. So this just lifts it up a little bit so that I can stitch pretty close to that edge without running into it at all. And I'm going to do the same on this side too. Perfect. We are ready to go. Waves and bubbles, here we come. So here's a funny one. I happen to be wearing a jacket today, and the magnets on the front are catching on it. So I'm just going to swivel them right around my roller bar almost to the bottom so they don't catch on my clothes. One nice thing about this particular quilt is there's quite a lot of horizontal seam lines, so they're serving as a good visual guide for me to keep my waves and bubbles more or less in a straight line. I find that with my quilting, much like my handwriting, I tend to run uphill if I don't have some sort of guideline to line up my eye with. So when I'm quilting, that's the piecing. What does everyone think of my choice of green thread? I certainly could equally well have chosen, you know, an aqua or hot pink. I do happen to have a neon pink thread, and I did briefly think about that, and then I thought, oh, maybe that's a little bit overkill in our playful quilt. I had to stop and think there for a minute. What am I doing next? I have to pay a little bit of attention with this design. While I quilt, let me mention a few credits for the show, and one of them is to our very good friend Dan Unger, who created the beautiful guitar music that you're hearing. He graciously allows us to use the music for our show, and we sure appreciate it. And a huge one goes out to my husband Dave. You know, sometimes you watch YouTube shows and they're so common anymore, you see so many, and it's easy to forget how many things really go into it and how many places there are to go wrong. And I certainly appreciate Dave doing all the technical details of this. If it weren't for him, this show would not be, that is for sure. And then, of course, credit to our son Will, who's did a series of little introductory voices for the show. They're kind of fun. This is tricky to see across all these prints. On the row that doesn't have bubbles, I'm usually paying attention to the spacing of my waves, and if I think they need a little tweaking or adjusting, some have gotten larger, some have gotten smaller, it's in that row that I try and make, you know, gentle little adjustments. Okay, now we're going to take off all the apparatus, all the apparati. What's the plural of apparatus? Does anybody know? I'll just get this end undone and then we'll take a couple of questions. Often I just move while Lucy is attached and I just advance, machine and all, and just keep stitching. But in this case, I will detach her so that you can see me. On the right-hand side, Dave, or on the left? Oh, okay. Okay. Phew, got the other camera going. Good news. Oh, and look, Dave brought me coffee, you guys. I'm just going to stand back from the quilt a little bit and get a couple sips in, okay? And wet my whistle.
Are the bubbles random?
Someone is asking, are the bubbles random? Do you mean random in terms of placement or random in terms of size?
Placement.
They're really not. There's a bubble in the crest or the dip of each wave. And the waves are as evenly spaced as I can make them. But it is certainly casual. I did not pre-measure them, and sometimes they end up bigger and sometimes they end up larger or smaller.
Laurie is asking, is there a technique of getting clamps on that you find them really hard to stay put, so it's almost impossible sometimes?
Okay, Laurie is asking about putting the clamps on. Is there a technique for getting them to stay put? So getting them on and, whoops, dropped a pin. So for one thing, I'm going to tell you what I did when I first got my clamps. I found them really hard to get the fabric in. There's a very narrow channel if you're using this same brand. There are others that open differently and therefore wider. So I actually called Quilts on the Corner, who makes and sells these, and spoke to a representative. And here was her great tip, was to use a corsage pin. And
Hold on, I'm going to go to the other camera where they can see it.
do I need to bring the machine then? Okay, there we go. So I just get the fabric started at one end and I literally use my pin to push it in. So for instance, if this is a selvage edge and it's got that little tiny frayed bit that fabrics often have, this pin will take care of that, and I just smooth it in there. And then I make sure that it's kind of all the way in, because it goes almost half an inch into that groove, and then clamp it shut. And I don't think I've ever had a clamp pull off, except the odd time where the fabric was really crooked, where that edge was crooked, and so it wasn't getting a good grip, but that's not really the fault of the clamp. So that's how I do it, and it's a pretty decent grip. So if I didn't get the question quite right, let me know, and I'll try and circle back around.
Just make sure that you're in the right line.
You can't really see it super closely. Just make sure that you are in the right groove. When the clamp is open, there's just one groove and it's only barely 1/8 of an inch thick, and that's what your fabric's got to fit into. If the fabric is just lying loose in here, there's probably not enough grip. Does that make sense? It should be into that groove. Okay, got that one?
Along your side snappers. This is from Jean McNeil's. She got a 12-inch for her long arm.
My side snappers are 19 inches. I've told people that they're 16, but actually they're 19. But, you know, that would depend on the depth of throat of your machine. I don't think you want them fully as long as your throat, because you'll get examples like I actually have today where I'm not all the way at the back with my quilt. And I want some leeway in where I attach this. But mine do happen to be 19. Yes. I'm going to roll the quilt while Dave looks for some more questions. I'm sorry about the awkwardness. That's just the way it is today. We're not able to throw them up on the screen, which is what we usually do for me. One of the cool things Dave usually does for me. And like I said, this is just a little bitty quilt. Here's the end already. So there's just going to be a few passes. I'm checking out my seam allowance while I'm here just to make sure that I'm not running into that seam allowance. But nope, it's lining up nice and straight.
Are the clamps on the side only on the backing, or are they also on the batting?
The clamps on the side, someone's asking, are they on just the backing or the batting as well? They are on just the backing. You would not be able to fit the batting in that little teeny tiny channel as well. I'm sure of it. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, there are various times when, I'm kind of known for dealing with problem quilts, so I get in some really significant problem quilts from time to time from clients. So there are times that I just can't get those little slim clamps on. There are times when I use the single clamps that came with my machine, and when I grasp the batting, I'll do whatever it takes. So I'll never say never, but for these particular clamps, you'll only want to grab one layer of fabric. That's definitely what they're intended for. And my preference is for sure to do this basting before I clamp. I feel like, here's my hand, I feel like if I clamp first and then stitch, my backing is going to be stretched tighter than my top, right? And then when I release the whole thing off the long arm, there's more top fabric than backing. So I always baste first and then put my clamp on. And then even though I'm only holding the backing, I'm putting tension on the whole thing because they're all attached to each other. Does that make sense? Sue is asking why my batting is so short on the left side. Sue, it's just because I placed it that way. I was busy talking. I could have centered it better, but really it doesn't matter as long as there's enough, right? There's one clamp and one yardstick. Yeah, these yardsticks belong to my dad. They're just the hardware store variety. Years ago, hardware stores used to give them away as their, to their valued customers. And somehow I inherited a couple of these. So they are, I think it's safe to say they're both older than I am, which is getting pretty old.
So we have a comment from Lauren. She says, I found this on March 18th, but the title says May 20th. Is this an old show, a new one? It's not nice to confuse old people.
Lauren is making comments apparently about how unnice it is of us to confuse old people with the dates on the shows. I'm quite baffled myself, quite honestly. I'm going to stop and take a sip of coffee because we do this all the time. Schedule them in advance, make the events on YouTube and make the events on Facebook and what have you. So I don't know. I don't know what I did wrong. It was me. I'll wear it.
Just blame the tech guy.
Dave is suggesting blame the tech guy, but I'm nicer than that. I wouldn't do that. Okay, back to quilting. Would you guys like to see, do you want to do a close-up, Dave, and we'll do a quick demo of how I pull a thread up? I realize I do these mechanical things so quickly I don't even think about it anymore. Okay, I'm hanging on, this side shows better. I'm hanging on to my needle thread, and I take one stitch in place, and that has pulled up a loop of the bobbin thread because it's formed one stitch. And I just grab that, and then I hang on to them both and start stitching. And I usually do 4 or 5 anchor stitches right there, and then up and away. I just did it on the solid pink so you could see. That is how I pull up bobbin thread, and I think most machines will work quite similarly. I do have it on the regulated stitch mode right now, and I'm doing 12 stitches per inch. I quite enjoy stitching with the constant speed, which means you just set a speed at which the needle moves, and then you have to move smoothly to control the stitch length, except when I'm doing live shows and I can't think of all the things at once. So you guys usually see me with my stitch regulator on, but in fact, a lot of my daily quilting is done with it turned off. I get asked quite often about the height of my machine too. If you see in some of the more distant shots, it's kind of chest height for me, or very nearly so. And that is higher than most long armors use, but this pattern is kind of a good example of why I like it that high. And it has to do with my particular brand of machine too, and the level of visibility. So I've got kind of a bar at the front of my machine that I need to see under when I'm quilting, if that makes sense. And so I prefer to have my machine fairly high so that I don't have to crick my neck to see down there where I need my visibility to be. So I experimented with my machine. Initially I did not have it this high. I raised it 2 inches from its initial setting, and then I raised it 2 inches again. And that is the most comfortable for me. So I encourage quilters to experiment a little bit with that and find what is the most comfortable and the least fatiguing for you. Went the wrong way. Whoops. There's a lot of things that I do not stop and undo for, but yeah, I totally went the wrong direction. Gotta remind myself there's no shame in pausing to reconsider what you're doing next. But it's only 2 or 3 inches. We'll just quickly undo it. There we are. And I'll just clip the threads. They're in that basting line, so I'm not worried about them coming undone. There's a couple inches of stitching in that basting line. Now we're on track. It's like Google Maps when it gets confused. And we're going to advance again. Good time for questions if you have them, but we do still have 2 advances. I can't quite do it in one. So this time I did choose to just leave Lucy in, and I'm just going to roll the quilt with the needle still down, and it will just go along. Lucy will just go along with the quilt. Okay, I'm ready. I'll grab a sip of coffee while Dave's reading me questions, okay? Okay, Sandy's asking how large the bubbles are. Oh, there's quite a variety, Sandy. 1.5-ish, 1 3/4-ish, somewhere in there.
Other than your years of experience and practice, what is the secret for keeping all the circles perfectly round and meeting the ends so well?
I'm sorry, there is no other. Sorry, I should have repeated that question. Someone's asking, other than years of practice, what's your secret to keeping the bubbles round and having the ends meet so well? And my answer was, there is no other. That was the secret. However, I will say too, they are not all perfect. Some weeks back, I posted on Instagram, and maybe I'll do it again. I had done this design, and I posted a few of the least perfect bubbles because they were pretty bad. They didn't overlap correctly at all, and they were kind of squashed looking. But in the overall scheme of things, they're fairly consistent, right? They're fairly lined up in rows. They're fairly equal size. And there's hundreds, obviously, across this quilt, right? So 10 or 20 or even 40 that are not perfect doesn't matter at all. I mean, few of them are actually perfect. But the quilt is so busy and the prints are so colorful. And you'll see when I post pictures later today or tomorrow when I get some good lighting. When you look at the whole thing, when you look toward the light and you see all that texture, the imperfect bubbles wouldn't show at all. So I wouldn't let that stop you from quilting it. And also, this design is a great way to practice making circles. You can see that when I stitch them, I'm not just using centrifugal force to dash around each bubble and then on to the next, dash around the bubble and then on to the next. Like, I'm just going at a consistent speed, and that's control. That's what you're aiming for. No matter what shape you're doing, you're always in control of the machine. So Mr. Producer is asking me if I'm in regulated or not regulated, but he must have been watching the screen because I already talked about that one. Yeah, usually when I'm doing these live episodes, I'm in regulated mode simply because I'm talking to, and it's just more things than I can stay focused on. But in my own day-to-day quilting, I am quite frequently in the constant or unregulated mode. I might give that a try today just to show you guys what it looks like. So I'm putting my clamps on each side again. And I've just, even underneath, you probably can't see this always because I do it so quickly, but I'm doing little tugs on the batting to make sure that it's coming down smoothly, that there's no rumples happening in here. I don't think I've ever had a batting crease, but I certainly have had where I've progressed the whole quilt and all of a sudden it's kind of got this frown shape where the center's been pulled up a bit faster. So with every pass, I tug my batting a bit and I zhuzh my fabric like quite firmly so that it's nice and smooth across here. Zhuzh is my new favorite word. It's very descriptive of many of the things I do. Mr. Producer is bringing me a question on the iPad because he doesn't want to tackle it. It must be complex. You guys must be coming up with good questions. So bear with me while I baste, and then I will read the question and answer it. Okay, now which one is it, Dave? Dorothy Middleton. My Gamble store says they discontinued these side clamps as they don't last as the plastic becomes brittle. Is this your experience? Dorothy, I've had these particular clamps for about a year, and I use them hard, like they have done dozens and dozens and dozens of quilts. No sign of wear so far. I don't know for sure. These are by the Red Snapper people, so I wonder if Gamble had something similar in design, but not this particular brand, because I know there are other clips out there that look similar. So I can't really give you a great answer on that. Only I've had these for about a year and I've used them really hard and there is no sign of breakage anywhere on them. So that's all I know about that. All right, we are set. I'm just going to check my bobbin thread while I'm here at the edge and thinking of it. Oh, we're still good for a few rows. What did I do? Pull the bobbin thread too short? It's not coming up in the top. Yep, there it is. For the sake of demonstrating, I'm going to do some stitching in an unregulated mode. So that means I've turned on my speed as a percentage of the total speed my machine can do, which will vary from machine to machine, so I won't even tell you the number. It's just what's comfortable for me. And what'll happen when I press start is the needle will just start going at that fixed speed. And then it's going to be up to me to stitch as smoothly as I can, and that's what will regulate the stitch length, okay? And I'm not going to talk while I do this because it's just one too many things. Here we go. And there we have it. So I did think of one other thing as I was doing that for the lady who was asking for any secrets to making round circles. One thing that I noticed while I was doing that is I am almost never actually looking at my needle. I'm always looking at where I'm going next. So when it comes to closing up the loop nicely, when I'm at the top of the circle, I'm already looking at the bottom where that closure is going to happen. And my needle follows where my eye is, if that makes sense. So be as relaxed as you can about your quilting, because I think that really helps to not get too focused on controlling every single individual stitch, but rather look on where you're going next. I tell you what, the way to startle yourself silly is to leave that constant mode on and go to baste and have it just immediately start at 100 bajillion stitches per second. It'll make you jump every time. Now I'm going to do something here because I have to, this bottom has just a little fullness that I want to put in. So I'm going to take a second to put my clamp on the right hand side so that I've got some resistance. A little bit. Because fabric is flexible, you know, when I'm stitching across it, it can kind of push out in front of me. But if I put this, holding it at this corner behind me, it will help me to ease in this fullness. If, you know, you certainly could drop some pins in here. I'm going to wing it. I'm used to winging it. But you certainly could if you wanted to make sure that you were getting all that fullness where it ought to be. I'm going to push my line of stitching up just a hair further. That's better. And listen, if you're not comfortable having your fingers in here this close to the hopper foot, that's a good reason to use pins too. You certainly have to keep your fingers down. Isn't that a pretty print that I'm stitching over right there? I just love that one. And I can feel my little basting seam underneath. I know that I'm not stitching over it. So when the quilt is done, that will all just disappear. Okay. We have a question, and Susan is going to get a little sip of lukewarm coffee.
It looks like you were more tense in that mode. Is it because you have to keep moving?
Someone says it's looking like I'm more tense in that mode. Is it because you have to keep moving? I don't think I am, Sue. Like, I was thinking of that honestly while I was stitching a little bit too. And one of my mental checklists is, can I lift my fingers off the handles? Like, am I gripping so tight that I can't move a muscle? And I wasn't. Like, I could shift my grip and it would be okay. So I think I was holding still, but I don't think I was tense. Oh, that coffee is fine. Just fine. That's all I have to say about that. Okay, my gripper's a problem here because I've got this big long tail. So why don't I take these pins out now? The tail will no longer bother me. This is where I'll need a pin to get it in my trusty channel. And even then, there are times that I can't get my backing into this little slim channel, and I just have to make do with clamps. So you just do what you got to do. Oh, I might have got it. I was just about ready to give up, and then there it went. We got it. Come here, pin. Okay, so just a few more lines, and we'll be done. This is the end. Look, no running out of backing. Okay, we are on regulated mode. Just had to be sure before I press the on button. If you can bring yourself to quilt without that stitch regulator and use the constant mode, I think I can safely promise that it will make you a better quilter. Because you have to smooth out your quilting. You have to learn how to move smoothly. And that will carry over into just your control of quilting. Not only speed, but literally the smoothness of the designs you quilt. So if you can bring yourself to do that, I think that is a foolproof way to improve your quilting. It's not easy, you know. It's like going for a workout, right? It's not pleasant necessarily when you don't feel comfortable doing it. But it is a surefire way to smooth out and improve your quilting. Forgot to put my yardstick on and I'm feeling it. I can just feel when Lucy comes up under this little edge gripper. And so when I just lift it even a half an inch, it makes a world of difference. And I just ran out of bobbin thread. Look at that. You guys know me, I don't do the fancy measuring and so forth. I just let it run out and then deal with it. So in this case, I'm so close to the edge, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the edge. I always undo about 2 inches because the bobbin didn't have correct tension on it that last little bit. But because I'm so close to the edge, I'm just going to go right back to the basting of the quilt and do my changeover in there. Typically, my quilting, like today, is on not too fussy quilts. And so if it had happened in the middle of a row, I would just have done my, I'd overlapped my new stitching by, 2 or 3 stitches, done a nice lock of 4 or 5 the same way that I began that thread earlier, and just continued on. And I just strategically pick where that's going to happen. A fabric that's got a matching color or a busy fabric where that little overlap of stitching won't show. And I do that all the time. On quilts like this, I do not spend the time knotting and burying threads. There's a time and a place for that, but this type of couch quilt, I don't think is it. And guess what? I forgot to load another bobbin. So I'm going to set it to load and I'm going to come back on camera and see if there are any more questions or comments while that loads. Apparently there's not too many. So, yeah, as a whole, let's just look at the whole thing. I'm looking at the rolled up bit with the teal backing now. And my aqua thread on it. And the aqua thread certainly is a couple shades lighter, but it blends better than the green would have. And again, because my bubbles aren't perfect, it's good if it kind of blends on that backing and doesn't show too clearly. So it's all good. I just love all the colors in this quilt. Just love it. Okay, my bobbin is done. I will go fetch it. I do load my own bobbins. I like to use the same type of thread, top and bottom. That is certainly not essential. It's just my preference. And usually when I grab one bobbin, I put the next one in to load when I'm working on a quilt, and then they're always ready for me.
Now we have a question, and that the delay. So we have a question. I know that the gentleman named Lucy, and we have a Lucy sign, but is there a story about how she or her predecessor?
Someone's asking about knowing that my machine is named Lucy, and so I had a Lucy 1.0 at one time. How did that come to be? I honestly am not sure. Initially, my first thought was I was naming my quilting machine Lucinda, but that was just way too awkward and unwieldy. But I honestly don't know where that came from. And Lucy was much easier. Lucinda only lasted a week or 2. And then she was out of here, and we were that was much too formal for me. And one of my good friends found the I Love Lucy sign for me. I've had that for a long time in my studio. One of my quilty friends. And I was on the other end, wasn't I, when I ran out of bobbin thread? But it truly doesn't matter with this design. Again, I'm using my piecing line. There's a seam line just a very little bit below my bubbles. So I'm using that visually to keep them in a pretty straight row. And if I was off by a fair bit, I would just start making, you know, where the areas were longer, I would make a little bit bigger bubbles. And if it was a lot, I would try and space it out over a couple of rows so it didn't look too drastic. See there, I remembered to pause and make sure I had the right destination in mind. Talking about the merits of stitching in a constant mode as well, I think that you will find that it is conducive to making smoother circles too. There is something about having the stitch regulator on. Because the motor is constantly adjusting, there is that little bit of almost drag. It's not quite as smooth as butter when you're quilting. And if you can do it in the constant mode, I think you'll have better success with circles. So that's another thing you might try. These bubbles are just a little bit smaller and my waves are a little bit closer than they were higher up on the quilt, just because I want to fit in that last final row. And I wouldn't have to. You could also stitch off into the basting or stitch half circles. But it's the way I choose to manage it on this one. So hopefully, yeah, Susan goofed up. But you know what? That bubble is staying put. Let's see. We are going to do partial circles. There we go. I thought I had left enough room, but no. I'm just trying to envision what it would look like if an entire repeat was there. And I'm just putting 2/3 of a circle in there. And there we have it. Okay, I will unload. Mr. Producer will tell me if there are any final questions. And I will, the lighting is fairly good so far today, so I'll maybe try and get some pictures up yet today so you can have a good look at this. Which camera do you prefer, hon? Okay, I'm gonna grab my cuppa. Okay, here we are. All right, are there any more questions about it?
There are not. They asked if you have an anti-fatigue mat, and I answered that one, said you do.
Yes, someone was asking about whether or not I have an anti-fatigue mat, and yes, I do. It's just a runner style here in the area where I walk. And I first came to that, you know, I didn't really think I needed an anti-fatigue mat because I have carpet, but I was literally wearing the carpet to a nub. And so I got this anti-fatigue mat and then thought, oh, where have you been all my life? So yes, I've had it for a long time now, and I do love it. And it rests right against the wall behind me here. And in that little crevice where fatigue mat meets wall is where I keep my magnets all in a row, kind of nose to tail, so that I don't inadvertently stub my toes on them. You don't want to do that. They really hurt. So, yeah, I think we're about done. So once again, this was Waves and Bubbles as an edge-to-edge design. Couple of the considerations were what color thread, because the front is so colorful, what color is complementary on the back, and I have to set my coffee down for this one because I need 2 hands. And those of you who watch often know that I will often load a quilt sort of lengthways so that I have fewer passes this way and the length of it is from side to side. Today I chose to load it right side up because I want my bubbles to run from side to side on the quilt. So that's something you want to think about before you load a quilt is what are you going to quilt on it? Does it matter which way you orient it when you're loading it?
Do you have a question?
Okay, we have a question.
Joan and Peggy, it's two. So I missed that at the beginning. So your first one top, how is it filled in? And the next one is they're asking if at the beginning that you did partial circles on the first row.
Good questions actually. Why don't we just roll back? Because I was thinking about that too and I was going to do it off air, but since you guys have asked, someone is asking, how did you fill in the top? Did you put in partial circles? And I'll show you what I typically do. Dee. All the way back we go. So let's roll back just a little more so I can reach it better. So I started by doing just a wavy line that had no bubbles in it. And usually I quilt back then above it with another wavy line. And I didn't because I was talking to you guys. So why don't I do it now? So absolutely, you could put partial circles in here. But because I'm pretty close to the edge of the quilt, I'm just going to go put in the suggestion of another wave. And all it does is keeps us from having that big kind of half moon of unquilted space. I did this particular one on a big enough scale, you know, that probably wouldn't have even been noticeable to anyone looking at the quilt. But since you asked, this is what I typically do, is I just do another wavy line across the top. And it just fills in that little slightly awkward place. And I end my thread the same way I began it, with 4 or 5 stitches in quick succession. Take 1 stitch to pull that bobbin thread to the top, and then trim it off. Trim them both off from the top. So that's it. Waves and bubbles. I'm pretty pleased with that. All right. Thank you all for joining me. I would be so appreciative if you would like and subscribe and share and bring more quilters into the fold. Don't forget, listen to podcast episodes. There's a new one coming out every Wednesday. I'm still way out of the middle. There's a new episode coming out every Wednesday morning is a fresh one. And they're interviews with other quilters and occasionally other crafters as well. And they're just lighthearted and intended to be encouraging. And there's sometimes little lessons in there too. So that's the podcast. Live and Unscripted is aired on YouTube the first and third Friday of every month.